Hello, this is episode 10.5. And like I said, I think in spite of the couple of scary things that happened to me this year, this was literally my most favorite middle school year. I have a hard time deciding between this and the next year, actually. Both were really good. But a lot of nice things, experiences um, happened with me this year. So I really like it. So today I'd like to talk about some memories that I have with my second uncle, my Aparomaya, who's actually also my favorite uncle. I don't know if too many people know that, but so, and when I describe those experiences, you'll kind of understand why that is so. So, what I remember is around this time, um, my my brother was about 17-ish, so he was very involved in getting preparing for his IIT JEE, and just that year was the first year that uh, version of MSET was introduced. It was still not MSET yet, Engineering and Medical Common Entrance Test, but it was ESET, Engineering Common Entrance Test. The medical school people had a different test, which was very similar. So he was very much involved in preparing for that, and he was very busy in that. And there was I think he was also going through a lot of stress because, my father was very keen, given his intelligence and all, that he get into an IIT. So I believe he was sent for even tutorials. Back then, they didn't have uh, all these, so many tuitions and preparatory prep colleges. They didn't. So you had to actually go out of town. I believe he actually was sent to, during the summer holidays, sent to Vijayawada or some other town. I feel it's Vijayawada. And I think it was Agarwal classes or some coaching classes or some Reddy classes or something like that, Reddy Institute, something like that. He was sent away during the summer to actually, stay there and, get coached for these entrance exams, including the IIT JEE and the ESET that he was preparing for. So he was busy in that. My sister was very little, so she was just a baby, and uh, at that point there was nothing in common that we couldn't play like playmates. So, and she was just like a doll for me. So I couldn't, but at the same time I couldn't bathe or handle her because I was too young myself to do that. Um, and my mother was really busy in her PhD thing was ramping up. And the one nice thing was, although my room was taken away from me because she needed that to, as her study room, um, she did let me know that whenever I wanted to study, not like hang out or stay or sleep in, but whenever I wanted to study, I could use that room. So I was still had access to that. That was my favorite room in the house. I always had an eye on it, no matter whose hands it went to. In my mind, that was my room. That I will get one day. So I didn't care who it belonged to, and the fact that it was not even mine. But when I went there, I felt a certain sense of peace and belongingness and ownership for that room because it was initially supposed to be mine. So I had that. So that was nice. My pinny had left for USA, and my youngest Ataya was busy preparing for her BA finals, I think. So everybody was kind of busy in their lives, and there was suddenly, for a very brief period of time, there was kind of like a gap, but that gap was filled very soon. Guess why? Because all my aunts and uncles were married or busy with their lives, but my second uncle, my Aparamaya, was single. So he actually had some time to spare, and then that was worked out great for me, because around this time he started taking me to some um, really interesting movies, English movies. I never liked watching English movies until then. Actually, I didn't watch any English movies until then. There was one English movie that we watched when I was in, I think, third grade. It was actually a horror movie. It was, I still remember, it was like kind of scary. I remember when we watched it, there was a twin set of theaters. There were no multiplexes back then, called Skyline and Sterling. So in this Skyline and Sterling, they would show English movies sometimes. Largely, I think. Later on, it changed. So in that Sterling, and I remember it was Sterling because I didn't like the name Sterling. I liked going to Skyline, but the movie that we went to was in Sterling, and I remember the movie's name. This was in third grade a couple of years ago. It was called Race with the Devil. Our whole family, including my mom, also saw it. She actually liked it because it was not a typical, ugly horror movie, um, like the Exorcist or something like that, where you have vomit coming. It was very subtle. It was more like a witch cult, witch as in WITCH, not WHICH. Uh, the whole village is a cult, and how they take people in and how they kill people as a group who don't amalgamate into their cult. Uh, so that's why she found it interesting. There was no gore or blood, but it was still a scary movie. So it was called Race with the Devil, and I didn't understand it much, but that was the only English movie I saw. So, number one, I truly didn't understand the context. I couldn't relate to the characters because of their different skin color and like different setting scenario. I couldn't relate to anything at all that was going on, no matter what movie I would have watched. Sometimes there'd be some movies that would air on Doordarshan. uh, couldn't relate at all. And most importantly, I could not understand a word of what they were saying. Literally, I couldn't understand their accent at all. Maybe yes, no, something like that. Even if they said all right, or I wouldn't know that they were saying all right. So I absolutely couldn't understand the accent. So, and there are no subtitles back then. So I never took an interest. But my Aparamoya, interestingly, only watched English movies back then. English movies and very old Hindi classics. Devanand was actually his favorite. So he would watch very old Hindi classics. And his taste was very refined. Like I said in some of my previous episodes, he was very artistic, very progressive, very knowledgeable about a lot of things. And most importantly, from a very young age, I talked in one of the episodes about his apartment, how he designed it himself. It was very futuristic. So his taste was always very sophisticated, always. His thoughts were progressive, his taste was sophisticated. Um, Everything about how he thought, like his brain was very ahead of its time. That's the best way I can put it. And it was always like that. So basically, he'd be very selective about the kind of movies he watched. So he mostly watched English movies. He didn't like Hindi movies at all, other than the classics, like the black and white movies, which had a lot of depth and meat in it. So So he took me to this movie, and I always remember. And I went with him because, again, I loved spending time with my uncles and aunts, and everybody, my Pinny had left, and my Radhataya was busy in her studies. My parents were very busy. My sister was too young. My brother was very busy with his studies. So that's the only reason I went, because I actually wanted to spend time with him. I wasn't interested in the movie. I didn't expect much to come out of it. I knew I'd probably even fall asleep. Probably I would be bored, is what I thought. So the movie he took me to, and none of the movies we watched, it's not like they're like cult classics or anything like that, right? Um, but they all, but the way he related, but these are very close to my heart, all these movies, and I'll tell you why. So the first movie that he took me to, and I'll remember this for the rest of my life, like I often say, it was called The Final Countdown. Um, it was a moderate hit. It was not like a super hit. Neither is it considered like a cult classic, but it was one of my favorite movie for a very 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 long time. Maybe until I was 25, 26, this was my favorite movie, and it was my favorite movie because of the experience that I had with my Aparomoya. So this was the first movie we went to. I actually remember that we saw this movie, and there was um, a theater in Abbots. I think it is Sapna and Santosh. It is a complex. I think so. Yeah. So it was there that we went. And so we walked into the movie, and I expected to be bored. Um, we sat in the movie, and first, always back then, there used to be a documentary, boring documentary. Now I find documentaries so interesting. I'll never say no to a documentary, but back then they used to always start with a documentary, and then advertisements I used to like. So we saw all that, and then the movie started. I totally expected to be bored, all white people, and worst, at least if it was some kind of a drama, some kind of a Disney movie like a Snow White or Sound of Music. It's you can, the visuals are there, and you can, it's a drama, and it's about, the feelings are the same, people falling in love out of love, like typical Hindi movies were. Back then the term Bollywood didn't exist. So, but this was a war movie. It was totally something that of like a 10-year-old totally would have zero interest in it. Not only it was an American movie, I couldn't understand the language. There was no heroine in it. I knew in English movies, unless it was a musical, wouldn't have songs, but there was no love interest. There was no love story here at all. Actually, in the end, there is a love story in the end in this movie, but very small, like 5 minutes. But there was no love story. And it was literally a historic fiction. It was a war movie. So basically, the movie started, and I'm like, my God. But within a second of the movie starting, I remember this instant as if like happened in front of my eyes. Within a second, I'm not talking 5 minutes. I'm not talking 1 minute. I'm talking about the first scene of the movie. Is it starts off on a navy warship with an airstrip where the fighter jets are landing. Okay, and they're landing at like warp speed. So that's the first scene. That's the opening scene. It was actually filmed on a real USS warship. I think it was called USS Nimitz, I think. I'm not sure. But it was filmed on a real ship. Within a second of their starting, my uncle leaned over, and he started telling me the story. And I don't know how he could pay attention to the story, because back then there were no reviews, there was no Google. He was following it, and he was telling me the full story. And he was not just translating what they were saying, he was giving me the background and he was making it so interesting. So I loved that movie. So basically, what the movie is about is uh, there's a USS warship. It's the present time back then, and then they're on a mission to go somewhere on a war or on a mission, and then there's a big storm, and then that whole ship with its fleet and with its people and the navy and the pilots, they it's more to do with the planes actually than the ship itself, but it is the ship also. It gets back in time into World War II era, right? It goes back in time to the day before the Pearl Harbor bombing. And then the people in the ship, it takes them a while to realize that where they are back in time, and they have to make a decision whether to they're in a position to, because they are from the future, they know that the bombing is going to happen. Like these are all US, it's a USS Navy ship. So they have to make a decision whether to send a message to the USS Navy, Army, Air Force, and prevent the bombing and take the history in a different direction, or they have to decide whether to just come back to real time and uh, and witness the bombing and the subsequent, all the devastation that happens and subsequent whatever happens. So so in short, this is the movie, and but my Maya made it so interesting, and I he would first make me notice all these things. He would say, look how these Air Force Air Force planes are, the fighter planes, the fighter jets, the MiGs and the F-16s and all. He said, like, do you notice that normal planes have a long, like, airstrip to land, whereas the fighter jets, like, have a very, like, literally small runway. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's true. So that is the first scene of them just landing like this, because they're in the present time. And back in the day in the World War, like, the ships needed, like, the planes needed a long segue on the runway to land, whereas here the mix just, the fighter planes just land and they just stop, like, it's literally because on the ship the airstrip on these Navy ships is not very long. He showed me how that happens, and I found it so fascinating. Then I had no clue about what was World War II, or even I knew there were two world wars that happened, one and two. I didn't know what was in one, what was in two. He gave me the whole history of, what the World War, and he would give me the background. He would just not translate what's happening on screen. So he would say, look, like this is the World War, and he would catch me up. He said, this is the Axis powers, these are the countries that are in the Axis powers, these are the countries that are the allies, and Germany is a very strong force. He talked about the Nazis and how much hungry for power they were, the atrocities committed by them, and the little portion of the Holocaust, and then why this fight was happening and why World War II was happening, and what was the incident about Pearl Harbor, why that is so important, a very, very important historic event, and how that eventually led to, the U.S. joining the war full force, at more full force, and bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and how that was triggered all of that. How the United Nations was formed at the end of it, why they were in such a, dilemma whether to convey a stop or not stop, because a lot of good things also came out of the, as horrible as it sounds, it was devastating, but some outcomes happened that wouldn't have happened if the Pearl Harbor bombing didn't happen. So why the characters were so conflicted about whether to stop the bombing or not stop the bombing. They were very confused about what would serve in the greater good of mankind. He was giving me this whole background, believe it or not. He literally gave me this whole background and also catching me up with the subtitles. I don't know how he did this. I have no idea. It's a gift. I couldn't do this to save my life. Um, and at the end of it, and he also told me like no intervals and during the movie, right? So there was no gold spot or or chips in between. But actually, Indian. American movies also, the Indian people, like they just abruptly stopped the during the interval. They would give an interval, so he got me gold spot. I remember that. I used to enjoy that. And my family all used to like popcorn, and they never realized that I like chips. I hated popcorn, but my uncle always got me chips, so I would enjoy that. And he knew that I liked gold spot. I could very freely tell him that I liked that. um, so I normally am not that free with people. I don't tell them I want this, I want that. I don't feel comfortable doing that. So at the end of it, after we came out, literally the final countdown, which is not even a cult classic, it's like an average movie, but it became my favorite movie because I think that was the time, that was the exact precise event in my life, incident in my life, that created a love for history for me. I mean, literally, I went in one person, like a kid who was kind of unaware of world history and not even interested, and came out as a curious mind who wanted to know all these things, who wanted to explore more all these things that I heard. And my mother's library, and my mother had a lovely library. I started reading, I started looking for books and reading. I read about she had all these textbooks from USA, and she had a lot of history books, a lot of history, like textbooks, and like not comic books. And I found them so easy to read, all these things that he told me. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to learn more about Germany, the Nazis, the Holocaust. I wanted to learn more about United Nations, why it was formed. I wanted to also learn about things that happened later, like the Nuremberg trials, or the decolonization of that ensued after the United Nations have formed, of all these South Asian countries. I literally like was became so hungry to learn all about this, and I became like a big history buff. But over time, but the becoming a history buff was, I mean, I went into the theater as one person and came out as a different person, believe it or not. Then later on, I was looking forward. I always looked forward. I never felt intimidated, even though I still didn't understand the American accent. He took me to James Bond Moonraker, and there's a theater in Lakri Kapul called Amravati. We went there. And over there also, I thought maybe it's a one-off. He won't explain it, but he would always explain. So there he would explain, how like, gravity works in space, because part of the Moonraker is in space. And then he goes to different countries like James Bond, and who's James Bond, and how Ian Fleming had created this character, how it was Sean Connery in between, why they switched to Roger Moore later. And even about the actors and the things that were happening, he would explain all of it. He took me into another James Bond movie called You Only Live Twice. There also he was explaining how there was, that's shot in Japan, and there's a volcano there, and that volcano opens, and he was explaining how there are so many volcanoes in Japan, and there's many active volcanoes, and there's a Fujiyama volcano. Why Japan, like, how they went through the whole rebuilding process, the relationship with America, how it was contentious before and how it was kind of friendly, but there's a section of Japanese that still hates America, how there were Japanese concentration camps, and all the context of which was not in the movie actually. He knew so much about so many things, and it was just like whenever I went to a movie with him, it was, I mean, think about it. It's just a James Bond movie, but it felt like I went to kind of a big history lesson, interesting history lesson. I wish people taught history like this in schools. I mean, I really wish. And basically, in short, I can say that he was very insightful. He gave me the background of the movie. Like, he just didn't sit there and translate. This person is saying this. That person is saying this. It was like 100 times, 1,000 times better than reading the subtitles. So I'm actually happy that there were no subtitles. So we went to You Only Live Twice, and he took me to 36th Chamber of Shaolin. So that was a movie that had like a moderate success at the box office. I mean, many of these movies are not like I said, cult classics, but the experience of watching it with him, the context that he gave. So when he took me to that, he gave me the whole history of martial arts in China and Taiwan, especially, and the difference between, like, karate and kung fu. Like, for us, it's all karate, right? How kung fu is so important, how it's also a spiritual practice for them, because if you understand that in 36 Chamber of Shaolin, you'll realize that many, like, 40 years later, or 30 years later, Kung Fu Panda, the Walt Disney's, it's Walt Disney, right? I think so, or Pixar. Um, Anyways, Kung Fu Panda conveys the same thing, but my Moya already knew that like 30 years ago. Like, he kind of knew that it's not just a like a war thing, like a martial arts. It had a spiritual aspect to it. It had a cultural aspect to it, significant, big cultural aspect, like how it had an artistic aspect to it, like how Bharatanatyam or something is there. It's a practice, not just a martial arts that you use to defend yourself. It's also meditative in nature. He would give that whole background. And also the Manchu dynasty, that the in 36th Chamber of Shaolin, the main protagonist, he is fighting against the some of the oppression by the Manchu dynasty. So what are all the different dynasties in China, and how imperialism in China, and how now back then they didn't show communism, but he would also like help me understand that how it is now, and how it has a big history of Buddhism and and martial arts, and how these dynasties would be very oppressive. So, and one thing led to the other, and I used to do my own research, and eventually, maybe people don't know that Manchurian is, people think it's an Indo-Chinese word. It's not. Manchurian is the food, that was the recipes that were famous in the Manchu dynasty. So that's where the word Manchurian cuisine comes from, like just like Cantonese cuisine. It's not an Indo-Chinese word. It is actually a Chinese word. And it's actually a Chinese cuisine. Now, how close our Indian Manchurian comes to the real Manchurian, I don't know, but it's definitely that. All these I learned. And then we also saw Return of the Dragon by Bruce Lee. So it was like an amazing time for me. And what happened is, the more movies we watched together, I would come home. I'd want to read up more on it, like literally. Up until then, my knowledge and Amar Chitrakathas are wonderful. I was still like take them, but my knowledge was limited to like the kids' comic books, and even the knowledge of history came from there. But now I was so curious about history, is that I started reading textbooks, and I started reading books such as Nehru's Discovery of India, C Rajgopalachari's Mahabharata. Started reading all these like actual books. I developed a big interest at a very early age, in history, and I would every day. It didn't matter to me that I didn't have actually friends of my age. I would spend time in that study room and just pick one book after the other, one book after the other. And my mom has an amazing collection, had an amazing collection. I was very, very proud that she probably also had an interest in this. It was not just her research books, and it was all kinds of history books I had access to. So by the time I finished my fifth grade, and I'm not exaggerating or making this up, my knowledge of history and civilizations and such was probably more like a college graduate, even maybe more. So, and to this day, like I know a lot about a lot, like people describe me like that, but the inspiration of that and the turning point for that, really, the full credit, 100%, 200, 300% of that credit of creating that interest in me for historical events, for uh, not just seeing historical events and mugging up the facts, but understanding the context of that. Why certain wars happen, why certain movements happen, why certain treaties happen between different countries, civics and politics, all of that. This was the foundation of that. These experiences with my Maya were the foundation of that. I'm so grateful to him for that. And I learned so much in that year. And this is something I carried forward with me. I still very much uh, love reading up on history and civics and politics. And this is the foundation for all that. So I'm almost over time. I am over time. So with that, I close. So the lesson from that very important lesson. They say knowledge is power, right? But know the difference between information and knowledge. Many people get that mixed up. So knowledge is actually a lot bigger than information. You can know a bunch of facts and a bunch of details about a lot of things, and you may want to share it, not share it. But knowledge is the insight that comes from all of that. So even though knowledge is power, that power is only increases by sharing. Okay, so share the knowledge, and sharing knowledge. What does that mean? I learned something. It's not merely sharing the facts that, oh, this war happened here, or I know this, or more from an ego perspective, I know this, I know this. It's more knowledge sharing. A true knowledge sharing occurs when you inculcate in another person the thirst for the same knowledge. They've learned it, and now they can fish on their own. You have inculcated the thirst of knowledge in them. That is true knowledge sharing. And truly, like, my Aparamaya was the epitome of that. I very much appreciate everything he taught me just in that 1 year, and inculcated a lifelong thirst for knowledge in me. So with that, I close. Next time I will come back with my 11.0. Okay, bye.